text.
Be all over in half an hour.
But I don't want to
There'll be a half hour in there, could be a 1.5 hours.
From the stadium.
insert
Go home and cook.
Come on then, let's go.
Thank you, members. Welcome back. We'll reconvene. If members can take their seats. And there is a presentation for the next paper, which is item 12, isn't it?
No, there's no presentation.
No presentation.
13, sorry. And that is the our feedback on the National Planning Standards discussion paper. And Phil Reid, in your hands.
Through the chair, I'm sorry, there isn't actually a presentation. It will be.
Yes.
I'll move.
I'll second.
Well done, good work.
Perhaps I might set the scene a little bit first.
Oh, I see what's happened.
Yeah,
My
set the
separate
scene, Phil.
open agenda items won't open.
Okay, members, we'll have to focus if we're going to get through our order paper for the balance of the day. So, Phil?
Okay. Quickly, National Planning Standards. We have another acronym under the RMAs. So we have NPSs for National Policy Statements, and we now have NPS for National Planning Standards. So National Planning Standards were brought in under the Amendment Act that came in April this year. Essentially what they are aiming to do is get some consistency across the country within the regional, district and unitary plans and policy statements. That consistency is going to be delivered through changes which would be made to plans in a mandatory way, which is without notification, public consultation and hearings, and also in a normal Schedule 1 process, which is what they call a discretionary process. The timeline for this is taking us through until 2024. We're in an informal discussion phase at the moment. The government have released some discussion papers, 9 of them. Lindley Wilkinson, to my left, has been involved in officer discussions with officials at Ministry for the Environment for some time now. Those conversations are continuing on, but we've reached a little milestone point of these discussion documents coming out, and we've assembled some feedback, which is attachment A to the report. The recommendation is that we stay involved in this process, put our feedback in, and at officials level stay involved discussing this with officials through until the formal phase that starts in April next year. April next year will be very clear about the degree of impact that there is on our unitary plan. In the report there's a little bit of dialogue about some concerns that there could be, that if these planning standards are far-reaching within our plan and do cause us to actually have to go back into some policy debates that we've had in recent times, then the implications on our ability to do a rolling review of the unitary plan or a full review of the unitary plan, and exactly when we do that review, are of concern. So there is a focus from us at the moment to look to see whether we can get the National Planning Standards to be close to what we have as our own unitary plan. But we will be looking very closely at this in April next year when we get to the formal phase as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. You'd like to take questions at this stage?
Yep.
Phil? So members, assuming you've read this material, are there questions? Councillor Newman, to begin with.
Thank you very much. So can you just touch on the issue of you made some pretty clear comments in relation to some of these overlays and zoning. This appears to have a disproportionate impact, and I'm just wondering if that is the intended consequence or the unintended consequence of how this matter has been captured by those within the Ministry for the Environment who are holding the pen. Yep. That's my first question.
From conversations with officials, it is an unintended consequence. The primary purpose of these national planning standards is to actually be able to make discrete changes into our plans that don't cause that broader policy debate to occur.
Can I ask, through you, Mr. Chair, that the discussion paper appears to be, and the development of this appears to be sitting at an officer level, which is fine, but do you have any sort of sense as to what extent those officials are prepared to concede the unintended consequence and reconsider some of these definitional issues in the context of the zoning and overlays?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment it's constructive. Since the discussion documents came out, there's been 2 visits by officials to talk to us about them. And we had expressed to us concerns which are in the paper, in particular in relation to the zones and the merging that would result from if we were to implement them. They're quite willing to take that on board, and the latest verbal feedback that we've had from them is that they may not be quite so strict in terms of the actual naming of those zones, enforcing them. It may be more around the construct of what zones actually are, rather than having to pick from exactly this list.
Can I just ask one more question, Mr. Chair, if
Absolutely.
I may? With respect to the zone framework, have the officials from the Ministry for the Environment given any thought to, I know it's an unintended consequence, I'm still a little nervous as to whether they are fully understanding that they shouldn't actually be touching some of these, if they have given any thought to the infrastructure implications of a definitional change affecting a zone at such a significant level, and how that would impact on an asset management plan which is contingent on only, say, a certain volume of connections or vehicle movements, etc.
Yeah, we actually did paint a picture which was similar to that. We actually painted a picture of what would occur as a result of amalgamation of zones back up through into the regional policy statement relative to the growth strategy, which then in turn would actually affect the infrastructure management planning. So that consequential effect across the plan, because it is tied together, is something that they're now well aware of from our feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Sayers?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. When I first read this and just listening to the presentation, I thought there was a risk there in terms of the unitary plan work, and I think so just being a bit of a pessimist around this, I guess, worst case scenario, is it even potentially more important for the structure, what we've just voted on, the structure plans, etc., be going into communities of potential growth, to protect them from decisions being made outside of our realm that could affect those communities? What I'm trying to say there, say a central government steps in and decides to do something in a township that we haven't planned for and overrides our planning initiatives. Is that a possibility? And would it, and because I'm thinking if maybe if they had structure plans in place, that might protect them even further.
I think there's a couple of risks. Probably the main one is an opportunity cost risk. If the more final version of the standards next year actually do create broad-scale needs for plan changes across the plan, and do reopen policy debates well ahead of when we otherwise would have wanted to, the resource requirement to be able to service that and defend that would mean that there is a crunch, if you like, on those same staff being available to actually support what we need them for, being the area spatial planning program. The other side, to answer your question, is these national planning standards would potentially change what the toolbox is of the actual provisions that are within the plans. So rather than tools which are very bespoke to us in Auckland that we've actually fought for through the hearings process, we may well have to have some tools which are more generalist tools that apply right across the country. So we would need to appraise those tools to see that they can actually still deliver the outcomes that are sought from those area spatial planning programs.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers. Other questions, members? Councillor Monkley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I take it from the feedback comments that officers agree essentially with the Ministry for the Environment and the Government that a standardised approach is helpful for the unitary plan, even though it is a kind of uniquely Auckland-based standardisation is desirable.
There are some good elements that come out of standardisation. If you look at it in terms of plan usability across the country, having some consistency about how our e-plans are delivered, having consistency in the way in which we actually do our mapping, can help with communities being able to enter into the planning world and be involved.
Would you agree that the significance of definitions has potentially legal and economic implications?
Yeah, definitions are one of those examples that are fully entwined within the plan. So, a change to a definition of a word such as site or dwelling is triggered off multiple rules that exist across the plan. So we need to see, firstly, the workability of all of those rules. We need to check whether or not those rules become more enabling or more constraining, and then whether that would actually generate a policy debate that actually occurs. So, yeah, a simple change like the definition of site could have major implications.
Thank you. And would you agree that that methodology in terms of clarity, eligibility and definitions should also be applied to our wider planning role in terms of, for instance, the Auckland plan?
I think that will help. I think if across the country there is greater consistency to the use of terms, then, into our strategic planning there'll be some benefit as well.
I won't belabour the point any further. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Other questions? Members, it's moved and seconded. Look, I could probably pose this as a question, but I might just say it in terms of comment. I have had a discussion with Phil on this, and while I think there is some merit in standardisation, there are matters highlighted by the staff that cause me concern. I really need to think of this through the mirror of Auckland rather than the balance of the country, and I think there could be considerable benefit for the balance of the country. But I'm very mindful, members, that we've just completed, in fact we're not quite completed, 95 and a bit % landed on the Auckland Unitary Plan. That's cost us tens of millions of dollars, tens of thousands of staff hours, a huge commitment from our communities, be they residential communities, business communities. We have landed almost finally that document, and I would not like to see us put in a position where we have to relitigate parts of that document. I have had a discussion with Phil Reid about maybe at this stage formalising a request for a 10-year moratorium on any changes that might be instructed through legislation out of the Parliament that would affect Auckland, because it would slow us up in the very matters that we've been discussing on the some of the subjects before us today, getting on with structure planning, area planning. I would have hoped that we're finished with that really high-level planning of unitary plan, future urban land supply strategy, and we start to crack on with delivery, real delivery to enable growth and development across Auckland. I am quite concerned, and I hear your preface, Phil, that it's not the intent, but I think we do need to gently, at the outset, convey our concern about getting caught up in relitigating significant parts of our Auckland Unitary Plan. Are there other speakers, members? Councillor Filipina.
Thank you, Chair, and to you both, thank you in regard to this, but also your work through the Unitary Committee in the last 2.5 years, which I led. Chair, my thoughts and my comments are based on 15, 16 and 17 under the potential impact on the Unitary Plan. And I agree with Councillor Newman in regards to at least possibly getting an update, whether it be around the zonings and the standards, the update coming through for us, because I am concerned around the last paragraph on 16, Phil, you know, around triggering broad-scale changes that reopen policy debates that have only recently been resolved. That is a concern, but I agree with 17, that you will also try to sort of continue the corridor with them around consistency. But I think it's important, going to Councillor Newman's question earlier, that if the relationship starts to go sour, that it's important it comes back to the planning committee. I mean, at the moment, it's amicable, you know, and you know, that's not a problem, but if it starts to sort of head the other direction, that's one thing through you, Chair, that we as Auckland Council do not want to end up going through. So, Phil, I mean, I again, just to confirm, I think it's important that if the relationship starts going the other way, that it's important it comes back here, because it then may need to have political not interference, but yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so that's really it for me. It's just now that we've got it, we need to hold on to it, but it's important that if it does, it comes back here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Filipana. And closing, Councillor Simpson.
Oh, no.
Not? Then I'll put the motion before us, moved by Councillor Filipana and seconded by Councillor Fletcher, to the vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Look, so thank you, Phil and Lily. And we will